True. Well, and you know, one of the things that you know, and it's the media's job. I mean, they're, you know, if it bleeds, it leads is the big rumor. So if it sounds like a really great story, even though you know the facts may be a little cloudy, it doesn't matter. They're going to run with that. That's going to be front page. You know, so you know, you're reading that Cameco is dumping toxic waste into Lake Ontario. Well, that sells newspapers. But you know, 10 pages in, when the actual story comes out, and you find out that, you know, it's stuff that has passed EPA, and it's all, you know,
it does tend to be.
It makes it about page 10.
That way,
it
but
might not be the way.
I think perhaps it just emphasizes how much it's important that we communicate with the community as a whole, so they have a greater understanding of our operations. And when something like this crops up, there is a greater trust that we are doing our utmost to make sure that we are having no negative effect on the environment.
And this information, I would think, would be available on your website, wouldn't it? I mean, if people had concerns.
Most of the information is available on our website, yes.
So, I mean, it's just a wealth of knowledge, really, if people wanted to take the time.
If people want to look at our website, it's CamecoPortHope.com, yes, they obviously can find a great deal of information.
Now, the fact that these local groups, these three local groups, FAIR is receiving $15,100, Lake Ontario Waterkeepers gets $11,500, and $7,800 to Port Hope Community Health Concerns Committee, is that perceived as a problem for you guys? I mean, obviously, with the way the media has been utilized by these particular groups, right, in terms of creating bad spin, I mean, is that going to create a knot in your stomach to know that these guys now have the money to pump out more publicity?
No, the main purpose of the money, and I think it will be overseen by the federal government, is it's used for getting outside experts to comment on the issues of particular concern to these groups. And to get expert opinion into the process of the environmental assessment is not a bad thing. You know, we want to get all the facts in as much as we can, so that we can be confident that when we move forward, we're moving forward with the best knowledge that we have. We'll come out with a good result at the end, and there won't be any surprises that somebody says, oh, well, what about this? What about that? We will have done a very thorough job at the end of the process.
Well, let's go back to the Vision 2010. Now that's being headed by Aldo D'Agostino.
Yes.
And from what we understand, it's on track.
Yes.
The comprehensive environmental assessment is about to begin.
That's correct.
How long do you figure it's going to take for the assessments to go through?
Well, we hope that latter part of this year we will have finished the environmental assessment, but it will still have to go through a review by the regulatory agencies, approval by the commission themselves, and then we go into a second phase of a license amendment to actually allow the work to go forward. So there is an extensive process here that will take probably a couple of years, but these timings are very, they tend to be fairly flexible. We certainly want to move it forward so we're on track and we can be moving soil at the same time as the Port Hope Area Initiative is moving soil as well. We need to be coordinated in that sense. So we do need to move on, but we know we have to go through a process which will take a fair amount of time.
Well, the federal environment minister and the federal government have talked about how they want to remove a lot of the red tape involved in environmental assessments. And now, have they done any of that as far as what they're making you do at Cameco, or is it basically the same as it was before?
I think we did see some speeding up of the process. I think with recent pronouncements from the federal government, they'd like to move this ahead. But that doesn't mean to say we can short-circuit the process at all. It still has to go through the steps to be defensible at the end, that all the aspects have been looked at.
So I guess, and I'm going to go back to these three groups again, I guess the fact that these three groups are now involved is probably going to go, we would hope anyway, that it would go a long way in allaying any concerns that they may have, especially as it pertains to the project itself.
Well, I hope so. I mean, there's an opportunity for them to dig a little deeper in the areas that they have concern and make sure that any items that come out as a result of that are passed into the process and are addressed in the process. So we hope that will be helpful to the process overall.
Now, you've had public forums. Last night you had another public forum, and that's like 14 so far that you've had in the last few while. Is the response that you're getting from the general public what you were expecting, or are you getting more of a turnout now with regards to these forums? Well,
I think we had a good turnout last night, but I think most of the forums have had a fairly good turnout. There are certainly some individuals who are much more interested in what's going on within Cameco than others. So we do tend to have the regulars, but we always get a few new ones as well. But the main purpose here is to get information out to the public so that people can understand what we do, the efforts we're making to protect the environment and protect people's health, the improvements that we're achieving, because we're generally working on programs of continual improvement, and we get a chance to explain these and at the same time bring in topics of concern to people, because we know that there are concerns out there, such as last night. Last night's forum was on risk and risk assessment and risk management. So we had 3 experts talk about risk. People perceive there's some risks with the Cameco operation, so let's talk about how these risks are looked at, what they are like in reality, and to show the management that really occurs with those risks.
Now, just prior to our last show as well, there was some discussion at Cameco with regards to a plume that was moving, a subterranean plume that was moving towards the lake. Can we get any information from you on what happened with that, how it was dealt with, what cleanup was put into play?
Well, okay, I think you've got to understand the history of our site is old as well, because that goes back to the 30s, and particularly closer to the harbour. The older plants existed. There was always been, really from the very beginning, contaminated soil there, and a small contaminated plume there that we've been addressing and measuring. But the main point that was new was from the UF6 plant. That's the big plant that's relatively new. We found there was a leak or leaks through the floor, and that created a new plume that was moving to the harbour through the old plume, as it were, making it more complicated.
Wow.
And needed to be dealt with. And when we have moved aggressively to deal with that, first of all to delineate exactly what the problems were in terms of removing some of the contaminated soil, and where there was contaminated groundwater, we've put in some pump collection wells where we're collecting the contaminated water that was moving towards the lake. First of all, cutting off the flow that was coming underneath that plant, and secondly, putting in a couple more wells that were closer to the harbour itself to collect the water there. So we're confident with the modelling that's been done that we have basically cut off the flow of that contaminated plume towards the harbour.
So it hasn't made it to the harbour, and hopefully...
We've confident we've collected the plume that was under the UF6 plant. There is still the historic material that's right next to the harbour, and there is some small amount, it's of the order of 30 to 40 kilograms a year by history. Probably now with these pump treat systems, it's more like 20 kilograms a year of uranium that does reach the harbour by that groundwater flow. But again, we're always looking to see how we can continually improve. And of course, part of the effort to address this issue is Vision 2010, which will remove much of the contaminated soil.
And that now, when we remove the contaminated soil, where does it get moved to?
Well, it will move to the it's now called the Balch Road site, I believe they call it, for the Port Hope Area Initiative. So with other contaminated soils around the town, they will all be collected in a new state-of-the-art facility on what is now the Welcome Waste Management Facility.
Now, is there some way to treat that waste so it's not a danger, or is it just sit at the site?
It's more a case of encapsulation to make sure if there's no water through it, then there's no reason for the material to migrate. So it's really kind of sealing it in and preventing any surface or groundwater flow of water through that waste when it's fully collected in that location.